Yes. Hi, I'm Hamish. Mostly I just wanted to use this picture, but it also kind of represents, because I feel like such a fraud sometimes chatting about data journalism, because I feel like I'm not of the same league of the rest of the speakers when it comes to data journalism. So today I wanted to talk just about the journalism side of it and leaked data, and not pretend that I know how to do web scraping or data visualizations or all the amazing manual labor that Juliet was doing. So I work for an organization called the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists. And I took the job mostly for the name of the organization. I thought it would look good on my CV. I had no idea what it was all about. You may never have heard of us. You may have heard of us. You've possibly, a bit about us. We're a non-profit. We're based in Washington, DC. We do have a core staff of about 40 now almost, but more than that, we're a network of reporters and media organizations from around the world, who we kind of bring together huge global investigative projects on issues that don't stop at national borders. So things like financial crime, particularly where secrecy is involved and money is moving around the world. It's a great time to get together with reporters from around the world to see if you can chase down the money. So even if you haven't heard of ICIJ, you may have heard of some of our projects. As Tom mentioned, these are the more recent ones. China Cables and Luanda leaks were both published in the past 7 months now, 8 months. Both kind of different styles of leaked data, but definitely based on leaked data. We also did a project called Solitary Voices based on information that we requested through Freedom of Information. At the heart of most of our investigations is some sort of data set. I'm really flying through this, but where you may have possibly heard of us, you may not have heard of ICIJ, but you may have heard of the Panama Papers, which is to date probably our biggest or most well-known investigation. So the Panama Papers, super quick overview, published in April 2016. It was an international investigation based on this huge leak of files from inside a law firm, a Panama-based law firm called Mossack Fonseca. It was 2.6 terabytes of data, or 11.5 million leaked files, which is a lot to get your head around. We did the maths, and I forgot to include it here, but it was along the lines of, if a single reporter was to spend 1 minute consuming each of those files and work continuously 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, then it would take them 22 years to go through all of it. So naturally, we put technology to work in all of our projects, and seek to mine these huge data sets for the stories that are within them. The Panama Papers, that involved looking at a lot of financial data. The law firm where the files came from, Mossack Fonseca, specialized in setting up offshore companies, often shell companies, which means there was no real company, it was purely on paper, in tax havens around the world. And these companies are used by businesses, by the uber wealthy, by celebrities, by criminals, by politicians, and they're often used for some sort of either illegal or morally questionable conduct. So it could be legally hiding your money from the tax authorities. It could be illegally hiding your money from the tax authorities. It could be masking the fact that your money is being used to finance arms trafficking or drugs trafficking or child sex industry, or to get around sanctions and funnel money into corrupt regimes. You could be using them to funnel money out of your own country, and into your own personal bank accounts. So the data itself had a huge amount of riches, but there was too much of it for any one journalist to tackle. So the way ICIJ works is to bring together huge teams of journalists who all bring their own expertise to the table. And that expertise can be data expertise. They may be amazing data journalists who can help us mine huge data sets, or it could be local expertise. It could be our reporter in Italy who has the most amazing connections in the Italian criminal justice system and can seemingly get the most secret court documents dropped in his briefcase during the lunch break in Milan's courtrooms. I don't know how he does it. It can be any number of expertise that gets brought to the table. So today, what I really wanted to run through, again, very, very quickly, are some of the common myths that I certainly seemed to hear about after we published the Panama Papers. There was a lot of backpatting and celebration when it was published, but there was also a lot of criticism, particularly in the US, from some of the more old school traditional investigative journalists. And the first myth around leaked data and journalism involving leaked data was that it was all just about luck, being in the right place at the right time, getting the leaked data set. There is always an element of luck involved in getting a data set. The Panama Papers data set was leaked by I guess you'd call him or her a whistleblower, an anonymous whistleblower who went only by the moniker John Doe. John Doe reached out to two German reporters, well, to one German reporter, Bastian Obermeier, who worked in collaboration with Frederick Obermeier. They are not related. They spell their surnames differently. We still call them the brothers Obermeier. Offering more data than they had ever seen before in their lives. The brothers Obermeier had worked with ICIJ in a number of projects and quickly contacted us and brought us into the fold when they realized just how much data they were looking at and how international the focus of that data was. Now, a lot of the detractors might say that the Obermeiers were lucky to get that John Doe contacted them, but that's not really the case. In my mind, a journalist makes their own luck. And the reason that John Doe specifically went to the Obermeiers, and the reason that we get a lot of the leaked data that we do get, is through building a robust network of sources and proving over and over again how the quality of our journalism, that we will treat leaked data and the whistleblowers who bring us leaked data with respect, and we will report on it responsibly. So for ICIJ and for the Obermeiers, there was a long history at play there. They had been part of earlier ICIJ investigations into financial secrecy, including secrecy for sale, or which is also known as the Offshore Leaks investigation in 2013, another investigation in 2014 based in Luxembourg, another in 2015 looking at private Swiss bank accounts, again based on sensitive leaked data. They were also constantly working on their own source networks to uncover potential data sets that were out there. And in the case of the Panama Papers, there became knowledge of a leaked data set floating around after the German authorities raided a particular bank in Germany. When the Obermeiers, using their inside sources, wrote about that raid on the German bank, Commerce Bank, John Doe woke up and paid attention and saw that here were two reporters with a proven track record, with access to an international network, and with an interest and expertise in financial data, who knew something about the information that he already held. It was a very attractive prospect for a whistleblower. So to my mind, good journalism begets good sources, begets good journalism. And getting data leaks is one of the metaphors that I quite liked. Was it was akin to storm chasing. You know, any idiot can stick a bucket in their back garden and catch a few raindrops. But if you really want to fill that bucket, you'll study the meteorological charts, you'll look at where rainfall is highest, and you'll stick your bucket in the right spot at the right time of day and know that you're pretty likely to get something in there. Second, myth number 2, while I fly through. This was one that really used to get under my collar. Thankfully, I've calmed down a lot in my older age. That there's no work needed. All you do is you just get the leaked information, Maybe you read it and then you just publish right at the other end. And that could not be further from the truth. Sometimes that does happen. It can be a judiciously placed leak of a single document that all a reporter needs to do is read it, make a few phone calls, verify it, do a little bit of backup work and publish out the other ends, you know, once and you're done. In the case of these huge data leaks, the data is really just the beginning. So when you think about the Panama Papers and how it came into ICIJ, 2.6 terabytes of data is a lot of data, 11.5 million files, it's a lot of files. The first thing that we need to do is to take a step back and look at what we've got, look at the entire picture of what we've got. In the case of the Panama Papers, this is an outline of the sorts of files that we were looking at. We had a lot of emails, PDFs, images, and text documents, and all of those are what I would call unstructured data. We also had a number of database formats. So these are things like Excel spreadsheets, as well as more complex database formats. And that usually represents some sort of structured data where there is a clear delineation of what the data is that you're looking at. Once you step back and big picture, you then need to figure out how are you going to process that data and find the stories that are within it. And that's where there's a huge amount of work involved. I realized as I was putting this together that these documents are actually from the Paradise Papers leak, not from the Panama Papers leak, but they were very similar. And these are the sorts of documents that we were looking at. So the first thing that we needed to do was make this all searchable by journalists. We built a tool that operated not dissimilarly to, say, Google search a Google search engine specifically for these leaked documents. We employed an army of computers to go through and read each of the documents, extract all of the text, and make it all searchable. The next thing you need to do is to start looking for the structure or a way, you're looking for a map and how you're going to sort and explore this huge amount of data. And so you can see on screen that there are chunks of text there that are freeform, that someone could have written anything in there. But then there's also structured text in there. There are tables so that you know whenever there's a new client introduction that you will see a table at the top with the name of the client, the name of the introducer, addresses and names. And you can begin to extract that data and build a structured data set which journalists can use to explore the documents and know where to start looking and start seeing patterns in the data that might help inform their searching. When you start breaking out that structured data, you can start to build networks around it. And in those networks will lie the connections which tell you that there's a story afoot. But the data is still just the beginning. What happens after that is a whole heap of traditional reporting. It's verifying the data that you're reporting on, making sure that it matches other official data sets. It's going and getting the court documents related to that person. It's going to these addresses to see what's there. It's lining up the interviews with the experts, and it's confronting the players with the accusations and finding out their side of the story. This is the Prime Minister of Iceland who, in one of my favorite TV interviews of all time, and I'm kind of biased because I remember it being shot, we confronted him with an offshore company that we had in our Panama Papers data called Vintris that he had never disclosed to the people of Iceland. And there was a moment in the interview where you could pretty much see his face turning grey. He lost his job 2 days later, and the country had a new government. So, busted 2 myths, that there's just luck and that there's no work involved. There's a huge amount of work involved, I promise you. I don't sit around all day twiddling my thumbs. The third myth is kind of a grey area and one that I throw in there very much to support ICIJ's model of working, but that with leaked data, that the real value is in having access to exclusive data. That's kind of true. That is where the real value in it is. Traditionally, though, journalists would see that as an excuse to shield the data off and work on their own and get that real exclusive scoop to the story so that they can have their run of front pages or their time at the top of the nightly news bulletin and drive the agenda. ICIJ's model is entirely different. We believe that the value, particularly in these large leaked data sets, can often be with sharing the data. Now, there's a caveat there. We only share the data within our trusted networks of reporters. So there is still an element of exclusivity to it. We're just spreading the exclusivity around the world. And that achieves a number of things when working on these large leaked data sets. It means that there are more hands on deck to work on the leaked data sets. And when you're talking about something like 2.6 terabytes of data, that can be really important. It means more eyes for verification, for fact checking. It means journalists with a wider array of skills to process the data, to start looking for patterns that can help the other journalists structure their searches and their investigations. At the other end, the publishing side, it also means that publishing as a team, we guarantee a larger audience and probably a larger impact for our investigations. When you have a story that is published by one news outlet on a single day or over the course of a week, it can make a splash in that news outlet's area. But when you have 100 news outlets publishing the findings of the investigation simultaneously all around the world, we're basically building a coalition that says there are stories in all of these countries, all of these audiences are connected. This is a genuinely global issue that requires some sort of coordinated global response. And that's what we've seen with the Panama Papers and with a number of our other large collaborative investigations, particularly based on leaked data sets. When we all publish together, we increase the amount of pressure that is on governments around the world to respond and to fix some of these broken systems that we're uncovering. It also helps our audiences feel connected to the other parts of the world and understand how their country and how their leaders are responding to the issues at play. So I'll finish with a really quick final thought, which we're often asked, and we're asked a lot at the time about the Panama Papers. What about the ethics of working with leaked data? And indeed of publishing leaked data. At the time, WikiLeaks were lukewarm about the Panama Papers for a couple of days. And then our director made the mistake of answering a question on, I think it was a live television interview about what differentiates us from WikiLeaks. And we basically said that we were the ethical journalists. And they weren't particularly pleased and went on a huge tirade on Twitter against us and raised, I thought, some very interesting questions that a lot of people, not just WikiLeaks, were asking. We did not publish all 11.5 million files of the Panama Papers. What we did publish eventually, about a month after our initial stories came out, was a database of some of the structured data that was in the Panama Papers. So this was hundreds of thousands of offshore entities, their ownership details, their addresses, their registered agents, which jurisdictions they were based in, the sort of information that you would usually find in a corporate registry in a more transparent jurisdiction. So there's a big ethical question at play when it comes to these data leaks of how do you deal with it and what can you publish and what can't you publish. And in the end, for us, it all comes back down to what drives us as journalists, what is fair and ethical, and ultimately what's in the public interest. The second element here is, as we're seeing more and more data leaks, we're actually seeing authorities really start to use the data that we do publish as parts of their investigations. And there was an interesting ruling last year, it went to the High Court, ATO versus Glencore. The ATO was using some of the documents from our Paradise Papers investigation as part of their investigation into Glencore's tax affairs. Glencore went to the courts to say that, no, this data is commercial in confidence. It was it was communications between us and our lawyers. It was never intended for publication. Therefore, the ATO should not be allowed to use it and should have to destroy it immediately. Went to the High Court, and the High Court ruled in favour of the ATO and said that basically it would be negligent of the ATO to ignore this data once it's out there, and to not use it in their investigations into Glencore's tax affairs. And the ATO really trumpeted that win, and seemingly put companies on notice, but using our leaked data. It was quite a bizarre moment, and warned that you're only one data leak away from transparency, which I thought threw a whole other interesting ethical ball in the air when it comes to dealing with when it comes to receiving and dealing with leaked data. So on that final note, we published the Offshore Leaks database, which I've already spoken about, and that's it from me.
Thank you, Hamish.